The rain tapped softly against the tall windows of the restaurant, blurring the sharp lights of downtown Chicago into golden smears. Inside, the air hummed with low chatter, clinking silverware, and the occasional burst of laughter from well-dressed guests who seemed to own the room just by sitting in it. Among them moved a young woman in a black uniform, her dark hair pulled back neatly, eyes downcast as she balanced a tray of empty wine glasses. She moved with quiet efficiency, never too fast, never too slow, just enough to stay invisible. To most of the people dining that night, she was simply the waitress. They didn't notice the slight wear on the toes of her black shoes, or how she always tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the same careful motion. They didn't see the tired lines around her eyes or the way her shoulders tensed whenever someone snapped their fingers instead of saying, "Excuse me." She'd learned long ago not to react, not to flinch, not to speak unless spoken to. In this world of polished manners and expensive tastes, she was part of the furniture, useful but forgettable. She'd been working at this place for nearly 2 years now. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. More importantly, it kept the lights on in the small apartment she shared with her 2 younger siblings. Her brother was in community college, studying to be an electrician, and her sister was still in high school, dreaming of becoming a nurse. Their parents were gone. First their dad to a sudden heart attack, then their mom just a year later, worn down by grief and medical debt. At 28, she'd become both sister and parent overnight, dropping everything to hold what was left of their family together. Before all that, things had been different. Much different. She remembered the cool weight of piano keys beneath her fingers when she was just 6 years old. Her mother used to sit beside her on the bench, humming along as she practiced scales. By 10, she was playing Chopin with a confidence that made her teacher tear up. At 14, she earned a full scholarship to a prestigious music school, and by 16, she was accepted into Juilliard's pre-college program. People called her a prodigy. Teachers said she had a rare gift. For a while, the future seemed written in sheet music, concert halls, recordings, maybe even international tours. But life doesn't follow sheet music. When her dad died, everything stopped. She came home for the funeral and never went back. There was no one else to take care of her siblings. No relatives nearby, no savings. Just a mountain of hospital bills and 2 scared kids who looked to her like she held the answers. So she sold her piano, the beautiful baby grand her grandparents had saved for years to buy her, and took the first job she could find. It was at a diner at first, then a cafe, and finally this upscale restaurant where tips were better and the hours, though long, allowed her to be home by midnight. Now, music lived only in stolen moments. Late at night after her siblings were asleep, she'd sit on the edge of her bed and hum melodies she used to play. Sometimes she'd trace the shape of piano keys on her desk with her fingertips, trying to remember the exact pressure needed for a soft pianissimo or a thundering fortissimo. She never told anyone about her past. Not her coworkers, not her neighbors. It felt too fragile to speak aloud, like if she said it out loud it would vanish completely as if it had never been real. Tonight, the restaurant was especially busy. A group of regulars had taken their usual corner table near the grand piano, a beautiful gleaming instrument that sat untouched most evenings, more decoration than tool. They were loud, laughing too hard at their own jokes, waving their hands dismissively when she approached to refill their water. "Hey, sweetheart," one of them called, not even looking up from his phone. "More bread. And tell the kitchen to hurry up with the lamb. It's been 20 minutes. She nodded, forcing a small smile. "Of course. Right away." As she turned, another man in the group nudged his friend and said, just loud enough for her to hear, "You think she's ever played that thing?" He jerked his chin toward the piano. "Probably thinks it's a fancy shelf." The table erupted in laughter. She kept walking, her face burning, but inside something twisted, a familiar ache she'd learned to bury deep. She didn't look back. She never did. Back in the kitchen, the heat was thick, the clatter of pans and shouted orders filling the air. She handed the breadbasket to the runner and leaned against the cool tile wall for just a second, closing her eyes. She could still hear their laughter echoing in her ears. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. But tonight, for some reason, it stung more than usual. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was the fact that today was the anniversary of her mother's passing. Or maybe it was just the weight of all the years she'd spent pretending she didn't miss the music, that she didn't miss herself. She pushed off the wall and returned to the floor, tray in hand. The restaurant's manager, a no-nonsense woman named Diane with sharp eyes and a kind heart, caught her arm gently. "You okay?" Diane asked, lowering her voice. "Yeah," she replied quickly. "Just tired." Diane studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Take 5 after this round. You've earned it." She thanked her and moved on, delivering desserts, clearing plates, refilling coffee. The night wore on. The rain outside slowed to a drizzle. The piano sat silent in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the soft glow of the chandeliers. She couldn't help glancing at it every time she passed. It called to her in a way she couldn't explain, not with sound but with memory. She remembered the smell of rosin and old sheet music, the way her hands used to fly across the keys without thinking, the feeling of being completely lost in a piece until the world outside disappeared. Once, just once, she let herself imagine sitting there. What would it feel like to play again? Not for an audience, not for a grade or a competition, but just for herself. Just to remember who she used to be. But the thought was dangerous. It made her chest tight, because remembering also meant facing everything she'd lost and everything she'd given up. She shook her head slightly, as if to clear the thought, and focused on the task at hand. A couple at table 12 needed their check. The espresso machine was acting up again, and the regulars were finally leaving, tossing a few crumpled bills on the table without meeting her eyes. As she cleared their dishes, one of them paused at the door, turned and said with a smirk, "Next time, maybe play us a tune while you serve. Bet you've got rhythm." His friends chuckled. She forced a polite nod and said nothing. But inside something shifted, not anger, not shame, something quieter, deeper, a spark. She finished her shift an hour later, counting her tips in the back office, enough for groceries and half the electric bill. She changed into her coat, said goodnight to Diane, and stepped out into the cool night air. The city was quieter now, the streets glistening under streetlights. She walked the 10 blocks home, her mind unusually restless. When she got to the apartment, her brother was asleep on the couch with a textbook open on his chest. Her sister had left a note on the fridge. "Made soup. Leftovers in pot. Love you." She smiled faintly, warmed some soup, and ate it standing at the counter. Then she went to her room, sat on the edge of her bed, and stared at the blank wall where a photo of her at Juilliard used to hang. She'd taken it down years ago. Too painful to look at, but tonight she didn't feel pain. She felt something else. A longing, yes, but also a strange kind of courage. She reached under her bed and pulled out an old shoebox. Inside were a few things she couldn't bear to part with. Her first recital program, a faded ribbon from a youth competition, and a single sheet of music. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the first piece she'd ever memorized. She ran her fingers over the notes, the ink slightly smudged from time and tears. Tomorrow was Friday. Another long shift. Another night of being unseen, but what if, just what if, she didn't have to be? She didn't know it yet, but tomorrow would be different. Because tomorrow the piano wouldn't just be a piece of furniture. Tomorrow, it would remember her, and she would remember herself. The next evening started like any other Friday at the restaurant. Busy, loud, and full of people who seemed to think the world revolved around their dinner reservations. The young woman arrived early, as she always did, tying her apron with practiced hands and checking the side station for clean napkins and extra straws. Outside, the city buzzed with weekend energy, but inside, she moved through her routine like a ghost. Present, but unnoticed. She hadn't slept much the night before. The old sheet music was still on her nightstand, and the memory of those mocking laughs from the previous night kept replaying in her head. Not with shame this time, but with a quiet, stubborn heat. She didn't know why, but something had changed. Maybe it was the rain, or the anniversary, or just the weight of too many years spent pretending she wasn't someone else entirely. Whatever it was, she woke up feeling different. Not bold, not fearless, but less willing to disappear. By 7 o'clock, the dining room was packed. Laughter rang out from every corner. Wine glasses clinked, and the kitchen doors swung open and shut like a metronome keeping time. She wove through the tables, taking orders, delivering food, smiling politely even when customers complained about the truffle oil being too earthy or the salmon not seared enough. She'd heard it all before. She knew how to nod, apologize, and move on. Then around 8, the manager, Diane, came rushing out of the back office, her face tight with stress. She scanned the room, then hurried over to the host stand, whispering urgently to the hostess. A few minutes later, Diane walked straight to the center of the dining room and clapped her hands together, not loudly, but enough to get attention. "Attention, everyone," she said, forcing cheer into her voice. "Our lounge pianist had a family emergency and won't be able to make it tonight. We're so sorry for the change, but we'll still have soft background music from our playlist." A few guests groaned playfully. One man near the window called out, "What, no Chopin with my filet mignon?" Diane laughed it off, but her eyes darted around nervously. The restaurant prided itself on live piano music on weekends. It was part of the upscale charm. Without it, the whole mood felt off, like a suit missing a tie. Then, from the corner table, the same one where the regulars always sat, one of them raised his voice, half joking, half sarcastic. "Hey, why don't we just get the waitress to play? She's been eyeing that piano all night like it owes her money." The table burst into laughter. Others nearby chuckled too, glancing toward the grand piano, then at her as if she were part of the joke. Her stomach dropped. She froze mid-step, tray in hand, cheeks burning. She wanted to vanish, to drop through the floor, but before she could look away, Diane turned, and her eyes landed right on her. For a split second, their gazes locked. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Diane didn't smile, didn't dismiss the comment. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying her with a look that wasn't mocking but curious. Like she was seeing her for the first time. "You know how to play?" Diane asked, voice low but clear. The room quieted a little. Everyone turned. She opened her mouth to say no, to laugh it off, to say, "Don't be silly, I just clear plates." That's what she always did, deflect, disappear, stay safe, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she felt her throat tighten, her heart pounding like it used to before a recital. And then, without thinking, without planning, she heard herself say, softly but clearly, "Yes." The word hung in the air like a single piano note. Silence. Then, from the corner table, one of the men snorted, "Oh, this I've got to see." Diane didn't hesitate. She walked over, placed a hand gently on her shoulder and said, "Okay, go ahead. Just one piece. Whatever you're comfortable with." She blinked. "Now?" "Now," Diane said with a small encouraging nod. The piano's been waiting. Her legs felt like they might give out. She set the tray down carefully on a nearby empty table, her hands trembling. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some curious, some amused, some already smirking, waiting for her to stumble. She walked toward the piano slowly, as if approaching something sacred. The instrument stood in the far corner of the room, bathed in soft amber light. It was a Steinway. She recognized it instantly by the curve of the lid, the grain of the wood. She hadn't seen one in years. She pulled out the bench, sat down, and placed her hands in her lap. They were shaking. She took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. Just one piece. Just one, but which one? Her mind raced. Something simple? A pop song? A jazz standard? No, that wasn't her. That wasn't who she was. Then, without deciding, her fingers moved on their own. She lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The first note rang out, deep, resonant and full of sorrow. It was Rachmaninoff. Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece she'd learned at 16 during a summer when the world still felt full of possibility. It wasn't easy. It wasn't safe. It was raw, powerful, and unapologetically emotional, just like the grief she'd carried for so long. At first, only a few people noticed. A couple stopped talking. A waiter paused mid-pour. But by the second phrase, the entire room had gone still. The music swelled, low, thunderous chords rolling like distant storms, then rising into aching lyrical lines that seemed to cry out from the keys. Her fingers, stiff from years of dishwater and tray carrying, remembered every turn, every dynamic shift, every breath between notes. It was as if her body had never forgotten, even if her mind had tried to bury it. She played with her eyes closed, lost in the sound, in the memory, in the sheer relief of finally letting go. The piano wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was a voice. Her voice. And after all these years of silence, it was roaring. At the next table, a woman reached for her husband's hand and held it tightly. Near the bar, A man who'd been scrolling on his phone lowered it slowly, his expression softening. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working, peeking through the service window stunned. The regulars at the corner table sat frozen. The one who'd made the joke earlier now stared at his wine glass like it held answers. His smirk was gone. She didn't notice any of it. She was somewhere else. Back in a practice room with sunlight streaming through tall windows. Back on a stage with her mother in the front row. Back in a time when music wasn't a secret, but her whole life. The piece built to its climax, furious, passionate, almost desperate, and then just as suddenly, it softened into a haunting, quiet ending. The final chord hung in the air, vibrating through the room like a held breath. Then, silence, not the awkward kind, not the kind that follows a mistake, but the deep, reverent silence that comes after something true has been said. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. No one even breathed. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. It was slow at first, just one pair of hands. Then another joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet applauding, some with tears in their eyes, others shaking their heads in disbelief. She opened her eyes, startled. The noise overwhelmed her. She wasn't used to this, wasn't used to being seen. She stood quickly, nearly knocking over the bench, and gave a small, awkward bow before hurrying toward the kitchen. Her face burned, her heart racing, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Release. Inside the kitchen, the staff stood in stunned silence. The head chef, a gruff man who rarely smiled, gave her a slow nod and said, "Damn, kid, you've been holding out on us." One of the line cooks whispered, "That was insane." She couldn't speak. She just leaned against the cool stainless steel counter trying to catch her breath. Diane appeared in the doorway, eyes bright. "You okay?" she asked gently. She nodded, but her voice came out shaky. I didn't think I could still do that." "You didn't just do it," Diane said, smiling. "You owned that room." Back in the dining area, the applause had died down, but the energy had shifted. People were talking not about the food or the wine, but about her. A woman approached the kitchen door, holding out a folded napkin. "Can you give this to her?" she asked one of the servers. It's everything." Inside the napkin was a generous tip, far more than anyone had ever left, and a business card. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, it read, "Please call me. I produce classical recordings. You belong on a stage, not a service line." More guests came forward, some with tips, some with kind words, some just to say thank you. One elderly man, his eyes watery, told her, "My wife used to play that same piece. You made me feel like she was here again." She accepted their gratitude with quiet nods, not knowing what else to do. She wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to being the center of anything. Later, as she finished her shift, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A coworker had recorded part of her performance on their phone and posted it online with the caption, "Our waitress just blew the roof off this place. Don't judge a book by its cover." Within an hour, the video had thousands of views. Comments poured in, "Who is she?" This gave me chills. She played like she had nothing left to lose. She scrolled through them in disbelief, sitting on the back steps of the restaurant, the city lights flickering around her. For the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible, but with the attention came a new kind of fear. What did this mean? Was this just a one-time moment? Or was it something more? She thought about the business card in her pocket, about the way the piano had felt beneath her fingers, like coming home after a long, long journey. She wasn't ready to answer those questions yet. But for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder. Maybe she didn't have to choose between being a provider and being an artist. Maybe, just maybe, she could be both. As she walked home that night, the city felt different, lighter, like the music had cleared something away, not just in the restaurant, but inside her. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for tonight, she let herself carry the echo of those final notes in her chest, like a promise. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled all the way home. The days after that night moved strangely, like time had stretched and twisted around her. At first, she thought it would all blow over. Just another Friday, another odd moment that people would forget by Monday. But the video didn't fade. If anything, it grew. By Sunday morning, it had been shared by local news pages, music blogs, even a few classical radio stations. Strangers messaged her through the restaurant's social media, asking if she'd play again, One message simply read, "You made me cry in a steakhouse. Thank you." She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being noticed, let alone celebrated. Every time her phone buzzed with a notification, her stomach flipped. She kept the business card tucked in her wallet, untouched, not because she didn't want to call, but because she was afraid of what might happen if she did. At home, her siblings noticed the change right away. Her brother came home from his evening shift and found her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone, eyes wide. "Did you see this?" he asked, holding up his own phone. On the screen was the video. Her at the piano, back straight, fingers flying, the room silent behind her. "Is that you?" She nodded slowly, not trusting her voice. Her sister rushed in moments later, squealing. "You're famous. My friends won't stop texting me. They all want to come to your restaurant." She tried to laugh it off. "It's not a big deal. I just played a song." But it was a big deal. And deep down she knew it. Work on Monday was different. The usual rush was there, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation. But now people looked at her differently. Not with pity or indifference, but with something like awe. Regulars who'd never said more than "More water, please," now greeted her by name. A couple even asked to be seated in her section just so they could talk to her. She didn't mind the kindness, but it made her uneasy. She liked being invisible. It was safe. Being seen meant expectations. And expectations meant the possibility of failing again. Diane pulled her aside during a lull in the afternoon. "Listen," she said, arms crossed but eyes warm. "I've been getting calls. From event planners, local theaters, even a community college music department. They all want you to perform." She swallowed. "I don't know. You don't have to decide today," Diane said gently. "But don't shut the door just because you're scared. You've got a gift, and the world needs to hear it." That night, after her shift, she walked past the piano on her way out. It sat there, quiet and waiting, like it knew she'd be back. She stopped just for a second and ran her fingers along the smooth wood of the lid. It felt familiar, like an old friend. She went home and dug out the shoebox again. This time, she didn't just look at the sheet music. She tried to play it in her head, note by note, the way she used to. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel sadness. She felt possibility. By Wednesday, she'd made a decision. She called the number on the business card. The man on the other end had a calm, steady voice. He didn't gush or oversell. He just listened as she haltingly explained who she was, what had happened, and how she hadn't played seriously in over a decade. "I've seen the video," he said. "You don't sound like someone who's been away from the piano. You sound like someone who's been holding her breath." They talked for nearly an hour. He told her about a small charity concert he was producing next month, a benefit for music education in underfunded schools. "No pressure," he said. "Just you, a piano, and a room full of people who love music. Nothing fancy. Just real." She said yes before she could talk herself out of it. The next few weeks were a blur of nerves and rediscovery. She started practicing again, not on a real piano, but on a secondhand keyboard she bought from a neighbor for $50. It wasn't perfect, the middle C stuck sometimes and the pedals didn't work, but it was enough. She played late into the night after her siblings were asleep, relearning old pieces, smoothing out the rust, rebuilding the calluses on her fingertips. It wasn't easy. Some days her hands wouldn't cooperate. Other days frustration brought her to tears. But she kept going. Because every time she hit a wrong note, she remembered the silence in that restaurant, the way the room had held its breath, and she knew she had to try. Diane offered her the restaurant's piano for practice during off hours. So 3 nights a week after closing, she'd stay behind. The lights would be dimmed, the chairs stacked on tables, the air smelling faintly of garlic and wine. And in that quiet space, she'd play. At first, she only played for herself, but soon, the night cleaner started lingering, leaning against the bar with a mop in hand, listening. Then the dishwasher would pause his work, standing in the doorway. Even the security guard on his rounds would stop and nod along. No one said much. They didn't need to. Their presence was enough. As the concert date neared, the man from the business card, she learned his name was Daniel, sent her a simple black dress. "Wear it if you want," he'd said. "Or don't. Just be you." The night of the concert arrived. It wasn't in a grand hall, but in a modest community center with folding chairs and a slightly out-of-tune upright piano. Still, the room was full, Families, students, teachers, even a few familiar faces from the restaurant. She stood backstage, heart pounding, clutching the edges of her dress. She thought about running, about saying she was sick, but then she remembered her sister's words. You're not just playing for you. You're playing for everyone who gave up on their dream because life got hard. She took a deep breath and walked out. The audience rose as one, not in a standing ovation, but in quiet respect. She sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, and began. She played Rachmaninoff again, but this time it wasn't just about grief. It was about survival, about coming back. Midway through, she added something new, a short original piece she'd written during her late-night practice sessions. It started softly, like rain on a window, then built into something hopeful, like dawn breaking after a long night. When she finished, the applause was warm, genuine, and full of feeling, but not overwhelming. No one was there to gawk or judge. They were there to listen. And that made all the difference. Afterward, people came up to her, not for autographs, but to share stories. A high school student told her she'd been thinking of quitting piano lessons because her parents said it wasn't practical. But seeing you, I think I'll keep going, she said shyly. An older woman, eyes glistening, said, I used to sing in a choir, gave it up when my kids were born, forgot how much I missed it. She realized then that her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who'd ever set aside a dream for someone else, everyone who'd traded passion for responsibility, everyone who'd stayed quiet when they wanted to sing. On the bus ride home, she looked out the window at the city lights, her fingers still tingling from the keys. She wasn't famous. She wasn't rich. But for the first time in years, she felt whole. The next day at work, things were back to normal, mostly. But now when she passed the piano, she didn't look away. She smiled at it, like it was an old friend who'd never stopped believing in her. And when a new group of customers laughed too loudly at their table, one of them glancing toward the piano and saying, Bet no one here can play that thing, she didn't flinch. She just kept walking, head high, knowing something they didn't, that sometimes the quietest people have the loudest music inside them, and she wasn't done playing yet. The morning after the charity concert, she woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. At first, she thought it was just another round of kind messages from strangers, people saying her performance moved them, or asking where she'd play next. But this was different. The notifications weren't just from social media. They were calls, emails, voice messages from numbers she didn't recognize, all with the same tone, urgent, excited, full of possibility. One message stood out. It was from Daniel, the music producer. His voice was calm, but there was an energy underneath it she hadn't heard before. I've got an offer, he said. A small record label heard your performance. They want to talk about a studio session, just piano, no frills. They're not looking for a pop star. They're looking for truth, and that's what you gave them. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall, her heart thudding. A record deal? It sounded like something that happened to other people. People in magazines, people with agents and headshots and lives that looked nothing like hers. She was still a waitress. Still the one who scrubbed burnt sauce off pans at 2 a.m. Still the one who checked the grocery list twice to make sure they could afford milk and bread for the week, but then she remembered the way her fingers had felt on the keys the night before, sure, steady, alive, and she remembered the faces in the audience. Not judging, not expecting perfection, just listening like she mattered. She took a breath and called him back. Over the next few days, life moved in two worlds. By day, she worked her usual shift, taking orders, refilling coffee, smiling through complaints about overcooked pasta. By night, she practiced, not just old pieces, but new ones too. She started writing again, scribbling melodies on napkins during breaks, humming chord progressions while washing dishes. Music wasn't just returning to her, it was growing. Her siblings noticed the change. Her brother stopped asking if she was okay and started asking if she needed help with anything so she could rest her hands. Her sister began leaving little notes on the piano keyboard she'd taped to the kitchen table. You're amazing. Play the one with the rain sound again. I told my science teacher you're going to be famous. She laughed at that last one. I'm not going to be famous, she said. Maybe not famous, her sister replied, but important. There's a difference. Meanwhile, the restaurant became a strange kind of home base for her new life. Diane rearranged the schedule so she could leave early on days she had meetings or rehearsals. The other servers started calling her Maestro as a joke, but there was real respect in their voices. Even the kitchen staff, usually too busy to notice anything beyond the dinner rush, would pause when she walked by and give her a quiet nod, like they were in on a secret. Then came the invitation that changed everything. It was for a benefit gala, hosted at the very same restaurant where it all began. A local arts foundation was raising money to fund music programs in public schools, and they wanted her to be the featured performer. Not in the corner by the bar, not as background noise, but center stage under real lights with a proper sound system and a program that listed her name in bold print. She almost said no. The thought of playing in that room again, where she'd been laughed at, where she'd felt so small, terrified her. What if she froze? What if people expected too much? What if she let everyone down? But then she remembered the night she first played, how the room had gone silent, how the same people who mocked her had stood up and clapped, how music had turned strangers into witnesses and witnesses into believers. Maybe it wasn't about proving anything. Maybe it was about coming full circle. She said yes. Preparations began in earnest. Daniel helped her choose pieces, not just classical, but a few of her own compositions too. She spent hours refining them, testing which ones carried the most feeling, which ones told her story without words. One piece was about her mother's hands, gentle, always busy, always warm. Another was about the sound of rain on their old apartment roof the night her dad died. She didn't give them fancy titles. She just called them for her and that night. The week before the gala, she practiced at the restaurant after hours. The grand piano had been tuned, polished, and moved to the center of the room. Chairs were arranged in neat rows. It looked like a real concert hall now, no longer just decoration. The first time she played there again, alone in the empty space, she cried. Not from sadness, but from relief, like she'd finally been forgiven, for leaving music, for hiding, for doubting herself. The night of the gala arrived. She arrived early, wearing a simple dress, navy blue, knee-length, nothing flashy. She didn't want attention on her clothes. She wanted it on the music. As guests began to arrive, she stayed in the back, watching from the kitchen doorway. She saw familiar faces, her regulars now dressed in suits and evening gowns, chatting quietly. She saw teachers from local schools, students with bright eyes, donors with programs clutched in their hands. And then, near the front row, she saw them. Her brother and sister sitting side by side, looking nervous and proud. Her chest tightened. Diane found her just before showtime. "You ready?" she asked. She nodded. "I think so." "You don't have to be perfect," Diane said softly. "You just have to be you. And that's more than enough." When the lights dimmed and the host introduced her, the room fell into a hush that felt different from the first time. This wasn't curiosity. This was anticipation, respect. She walked to the piano, sat down, and placed her hands on the keys. For a moment, she closed her eyes and remembered the girl she used to be, the one who believed music could save her, and the woman she'd become, the one who'd saved others first and only now was learning to save herself. She began to play. The first piece was Chopin, delicate, flowing, like water over stones. The second was one of her own, the one about her mother. Halfway through, she heard a soft sob from the audience. She didn't stop. She let the music carry it. By the third piece, the room was completely still. No coughing, no shuffling, just the sound of piano and breath. When she finished her set, the applause wasn't loud, it was deep, felt in the chest. People stood slowly, not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Afterward, guests lined up to speak with her, not to take selfies, but to say thank you. A woman told her she'd lost her daughter to illness and hadn't listened to piano in years, until tonight. A teacher said he'd show the recording to his students who thought classical music was boring. And then, from the back of the line, came the man who'd laughed at her that first night. He looked older now, humbler. He didn't say much, just handed her a small envelope. Inside was a check enough to cover a semester of community college for her sister, and a note. "I was wrong. You're not just a waitress. You're a gift." She didn't know what to say, so she just nodded and whispered, "Thank you." Later, as she helped clean up, because old habits die hard, Diane approached her with a smile. "So," she said, "what's next?" She looked around the room, the piano, the chairs, the empty wine glasses glinting under the lights. This place had been her prison and her stage. Her hiding spot and her launch pad? "I don't know," she admitted. "But I think I'll keep playing. And maybe keep serving too. Just not as much," Diane laughed. "Good, because I'd hate to lose you. But I'd hate even more to keep you here when the world needs to hear you." That night on the walk home, she didn't feel like two different people, the waitress and the pianist. She felt like one whole person, finally stitched back together. And for the first time, she believed she deserved to be seen. Not despite her past, but because of it. The music wasn't just returning. It was healing, and she was ready to let it. A year had passed since that rainy night when she'd sat down at the piano and changed everything. The restaurant still stood in the same spot downtown, its windows still catching the golden light of Chicago evenings, but inside, something quiet and powerful had shifted, not just in the space, but in the people who filled it. She walked through the front doors now, not in a server's uniform, but in a simple dress, her hands free of trays and order pads. She carried a small leather case instead, one that held sheet music, not pens or notepads. The staff greeted her with warm smiles and respectful nods. Some of the newer servers whispered to each other when she passed, not in mockery, but in awe. "That's her," they'd say. "The one who plays like the piano talks through her." Tonight was special. The restaurant was hosting its annual charity gala, and for the third time she was the featured performer. But this time it felt different. Not because the crowd was bigger, though it was, but because she no longer felt like an imposter stepping into someone else's spotlight. She belonged here, not just on the stage but in the story of this place. She'd kept her promise to herself, she hadn't abandoned her roots. She still worked a few shifts a week, not because she needed the money, though it helped, but because she missed the rhythm of it, the human connection. She liked knowing regulars by their coffee orders, remembering which table liked extra lemon with their fish. It kept her grounded. And on slow Tuesday nights when the dining room was half empty and the piano sat quiet, she'd sometimes sit down between serving desserts and play a short piece, just for whoever was listening. No announcement, no fanfare, just music offered like a gift. Her siblings were in the front row tonight, as they always were. Her brother now worked full-time as an apprentice electrician, his hands calloused but proud. Her sister was in her second year of nursing school, her eyes bright with purpose. They never missed a performance. Sometimes after the show, they'd all walk home together, talking about everything and nothing, the city lights stretching ahead like a promise. Backstage, though it was really just a corner behind the bar, she took a moment to breathe. The piano waited under soft lights, its polished surface gleaming. She ran her fingers along the edge, remembering the first time she'd touched it. Back then, she'd been afraid of what might happen if she played. Now, she was only afraid of what might happen if she didn't. The host stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice warm and steady. "Tonight, we gather not just to support music education in our schools, but to celebrate the truth that talent can be found anywhere, even in the most unexpected places. Please welcome someone who reminds us that greatness doesn't wear a label. It wears a heart." The room rose in applause before she even sat down. She walked to the piano, nodded to the audience, and took her seat. No grand entrance, no dramatic pause. Just her, the keys, and the silence that came before the first note. She began with a piece she'd written herself, a melody that started softly, like footsteps in snow, then grew into something strong and steady, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. It was called "For Everyone Who Was Ever Unseen." She hadn't planned to name it that, but the title came to her one night while practicing, and it stuck. As her fingers moved across the keys, she didn't think about technique or perfection. She thought about the years she'd spent folding herself small so others could take up space. She thought about the nights she'd cried into her pillow, wondering if she'd made the right choice giving up music. She thought about the first time someone had clapped for her, not out of pity, but out of awe, and she played all of it. Halfway through the set, she switched to a classical piece, Debussy this time, fluid and dreamlike but wove in a few of her own notes, like stitching her story into someone else's song. The audience leaned in, as if they could feel the blend of past and present in every chord. When she finished, the silence returned, but only for a heartbeat. Then the room erupted, not just in applause, but in something deeper. People stood. Some wiped their eyes. A young girl near the back, no older than 10, clutched a small keyboard notebook to her chest like it was sacred. After the performance, she didn't rush off stage. She stayed, greeting guests, shaking hands, accepting hugs. A teacher from a local elementary school told her they'd started a lunchtime piano club because of her. "The kids call it Waitress lessons," she said with a laugh. "They say if you can do it, so can they." Later, as the crowd thinned, the man who'd once mocked her approached again. He didn't say much, just handed her a photo. It was from that first night, taken by someone at the next table. In it, she's at the piano, eyes closed, completely lost in the music, while the room around her is frozen in stunned silence. On the back, he'd written, "This is the moment I learned to listen." She thanked him, tucking the photo into her music case like a treasure. By midnight, the last guest had left and the staff began cleaning up. She rolled up her sleeves and helped, stacking chairs, wiping down tables, folding napkins. Diane watched her for a moment, then smiled. "You know," she said, "you could be playing concert halls by now, touring, making albums. You don't have to be here doing this." She looked around the room, the piano, the bar, the familiar scuff marks on the floor, and shook her head. "This is where it started, where I was seen for the first time in years. I don't want to forget that." And she meant it. Fame hadn't changed her. Success hadn't made her forget. If anything, it had made her more grateful for the struggle, for the silence, for the people who'd given her a second chance without even knowing it. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new kind of balance. She recorded a short album, just piano, no vocals, no effects. It sold modestly, but the messages she received were priceless. A veteran said it helped him sleep through the night. A single parent said it reminded her she still had dreams worth chasing. She also started volunteering at a community center, teaching basic piano to kids who couldn't afford lessons. She didn't call it teaching. She called it sharing, and every time a child played their first scale correctly, she saw a little piece of her younger self, hopeful, nervous, full of potential. One afternoon, as she walked home from the center, she passed a street musician playing an old upright piano someone had left on the sidewalk. He was young, maybe early 20s, his fingers clumsy but earnest. She stopped, listened for a while, then dropped a few bills in his open case. He looked up, surprised. "Thanks," he said. "You've got something," she told him gently. "Keep going," he nodded, eyes bright. "I will." She walked on, smiling. It felt good to pass the torch, not as a star, but as someone who'd been there. Back at her apartment, her sister was making dinner. Her brother was fixing a lamp in the living room. The radio played softly in the background, classical for once. She sat at the small keyboard in the corner of her room, the one she'd bought for $50, and played a few notes. Not for an audience, not for a video, just for herself. And in that moment, she realized something. She wasn't the waitress who played piano. She wasn't the pianist who used to wait tables. She was just her, whole, real, enough. The world hadn't needed her to be perfect. It just needed her to show up, with her scars, her story, and her song, and that, she thought as the last note faded into the quiet of her room, was more than enough. Outside, the city hummed on, full of people hiding their gifts, waiting for someone to notice. But now, because of her, maybe a few more would dare to sit down at the piano and play. There was no grand finale, no final bow that marked the end of everything. Life didn't work that way, not for people like her. Instead, it kept moving, quiet and steady, like a river finding its path after a storm. The applause from the gala had faded weeks ago. The photos had been tucked into albums, and the restaurant had returned to its usual rhythm of clinking glasses and murmured conversations. But something had changed, not just in her, but in the air around her, like the world had taken a deep breath and decided to believe in second chances. She still woke before sunrise most mornings, not because she had to rush to a shift, but because the quiet hours belonged to her now. In the soft gray light of dawn, she'd make coffee, sit at her keyboard, and play. Sometimes it was a piece she knew by heart. Other times it was something new, fragments of melody that came to her in dreams or while washing dishes. She didn't write them down right away. She let them live in her fingers first, testing their weight, their truth. Her little apartment had changed too. The shoebox of memories now sat on a shelf beside a small stack of sheet music, with her name printed on the cover, her first published collection, modestly titled The Quiet Hands. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was real, and that mattered more. She still worked at the restaurant, though only 2 nights a week now. Not out of necessity, but choice. She liked the hum of the kitchen, the way regulars saved her their favorite table, the way new servers looked at her not with pity, but with quiet admiration. She'd even started mentoring a few of them, kids working their way through college, trying to balance dreams and rent. She never gave advice unless asked. But sometimes, over a shared pot of late-night coffee, she'd say, "Don't hide what makes you light up. The world needs that light." One Tuesday evening, as she was wiping down the bar after her shift, a young woman approached, nervous, eyes darting, hands twisting the strap of her bag. She looked barely out of high school. I saw the video," she said softly. "The one from last year. I've been coming here for months just to see if you'd play again." She smiled. "I'm here most Tuesdays." "You can always ask," the girl hesitated. "I used to sing in choir, but my family said it wouldn't pay the bills, so I stopped. Now I'm studying accounting, but I miss it." She didn't offer empty encouragement. Instead, she said, "What song did you love the most?" The girl's face lit up. "Ave Maria. I used to sing it every Sunday with my grandma." "Sing it now," she said gently. "Here?" "No, just a line. For you, not for me. For the part of you that's still listening." The girl took a shaky breath and sang one line, soft, trembling but true. When she finished, tears welled in her eyes. "I forgot how good it felt." "You didn't forget," she said. "You just buried it. But it's still there. And it's worth digging up." The girl left that night with a new kind of hope, not the flashy kind that comes from fame, but the quiet kind that comes from being reminded you still matter. That moment stayed with her. It made her realize her music wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about permission. Permission to be imperfect, to try again, to believe that your past doesn't lock you into your future. A few weeks later, she got a call from the community center where she volunteered. They'd received a small grant to expand their music program, and they wanted her to lead it, not just teach piano, but help design a space where anyone, no matter their age or background, could explore music without judgment. She said yes without hesitation. The new room was modest, just a converted storage closet with soundproofing foam and 2 donated keyboards. But to her, it felt like a sanctuary. She painted the walls a soft blue, hung up student drawings of musical notes, and placed a sign on the door that read, "All are welcome. No experience needed. Just show up." The first class filled within hours. Retirees came with trembling hands and decades of silence. Teenagers showed up after school, headphones around their necks, curious if real instruments could feel as powerful as their playlists. Single parents brought toddlers who banged on the keys with glee, and she let them. "Music starts with noise," she'd say. "The rest is just listening." She didn't teach scales first. She taught feeling. "Play what you're holding inside," she'd tell them. "Anger? Play loud sadness. Play slow joy. Play like no one's watching, because no one is. This room is yours." One rainy afternoon, an older man came in, maybe in his 70s, wearing a worn coat and carrying a folded newspaper. He stood in the doorway for nearly 10 minutes before stepping inside. "I used to play trumpet," he said, voice rough, "in the Army."
"Haven't touched an instrument in 40 years. She didn't hand him a trumpet, she didn't have one, but she sat him at the keyboard.
"Try this," she said. "It's different, but the heart's the same." He played one note, then another. By the end of the hour, he was humming along, eyes closed, tears tracking down his cheeks. "I forgot I could still feel this," he whispered. She just nodded. Some wounds don't need words. They need sound. As the months passed, her little program grew. Local musicians started volunteering. A violinist came on Thursdays. A jazz guitarist on Saturdays. They didn't just teach technique, they shared stories. About failure. About fear. About how music had saved them too. She never called it a school. She called it a home. Back at the restaurant, the piano in the corner was no longer just for her. On slow nights, Diane started inviting students from the program to play. At first they were shaky, eyes wide with terror. But the guests, many of whom remembered her story, listened with kindness. They clapped not because the playing was perfect, but because someone had dared to try. One evening, as she watched a teenage girl play a simple rendition of For Elise, her hand steady despite the tremor in her voice, she felt a deep swell of peace. This was the legacy she wanted. Not fame, not records, but this. A chain of courage, passed from one quiet soul to another. Her own music continued too. She recorded a second album, this time with her students playing small parts. Chords, harmonies, even a child's laughter woven into the background of one track. She called it We Begin Again. Critics didn't write about it much, but the people who needed it found it. That was enough. At home, life was simple but full. Her brother had moved into his own place, but still came over every Sunday for dinner. Her sister graduated nursing school and now worked at a children's hospital, where she sometimes played lullabies on an old piano in the waiting room. Just like you taught me, she'd say. And her? She still wore comfortable shoes, still checked the grocery list twice, still laughed too loud at bad jokes. But now when she walked down the street, people sometimes stopped her, not for autographs, but to say, "Your music got me through a hard week," or "My daughter started piano because of you." She always thanked them, not because she deserved the praise, but because she understood what it cost to say those words out loud. One spring evening, she returned to the restaurant for a special event, a fundraiser for the music program. The room was full, the piano polished, the air thick with warmth. She didn't play first. She let her students go before her, each one stepping into the light, nervous but proud. When it was her turn, she didn't choose a grand piece. She played a short, original composition, just 3 minutes long. It began with a single note, repeated like a heartbeat. Then it grew, layer by layer, until it filled the room with something gentle but unbreakable. Afterward, as people milled about, sipping wine and chatting, she stood by the piano, watching. She saw the old man from the community center talking to the teenage singer. She saw her sister laughing with a group of nurses. She saw the young waitress, the one who'd asked her to sing, now confidently taking orders, her posture taller, her smile easier. And in that moment, she understood. Her story wasn't over. It was still being written. In every note played, every dream reignited, every person who chose to believe they were more than their circumstances. She didn't need a spotlight to matter. She just needed to keep showing up with open hands, a willing heart, and the quiet courage to play, even when no one's watching. Because sometimes, the most powerful music isn't the kind that silences a room. It's the kind that gives someone else the courage to make a sound of their own.